Hey guys, tonight we head into a world where dinner is half a boiled beet and a handful of regrets. You're a medieval peasant and spoiler alert, you're hungry. Not I skipped lunch hungry. More like I just tried to eat a candle stub hungry. The pantry's been empty since last harvest, the well's a suspicious shade of brown, and the neighbour's goat is starting to look like an appetizer. But don't worry, we're not here to suffer. We're here to marvel at how you and your dirt-smudged community somehow keep going. Because despite famine frost and that one guy who keeps hoarding onions like a medieval dragon, you survive, maybe even thrive. With creativity, cunning, and just the right amount of delusion, you outwit the worst hunger history could throw at you. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fun to see who's listening while trying to fall asleep in Australia versus, say, Estonia. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge home on a dirt path that smells faintly of cabbage regrets and maybe your uncle's unwashed tunic. The wind is sharp today, sharper than usual, and it cuts through your woolen layers like a particularly judgmental aunt. Your belly groans and not in the oops I ate too fast, way more like it's performing an opera of despair. You haven't had a proper meal in days unless you count that watery soup, flavoured with a single turnip and 47 silent prayers. Welcome to the reality of a medieval peasant during famine season, also known as most seasons. You might be picturing a rustic wooden table laden with hearty loaves and stews. That table exists, sure, in your dreams. In your actual home, the table is cracked uneven and currently supporting one very determined spider. Let's rewind slightly. The crop failures started after an unusually cold summer. Your barley didn't ripen, the wheat turned yellow and limp like a sad haircut, and the root vegetables gone. Either rotted underground or dug up prematurely by that one desperate neighbour with the twitchy eye. His name might be Greor. There's always a Gregor. With no food coming in from the fields, you and your fellow villagers start raiding the storerooms, hoping to find forgotten sacks of oats, lentils, or literally anything chewable. Instead, you find old tools, a shrine to Saint Apollonia, and a small mouse staring at you with pity. Not ideal. So what do? You get creative. This is the beginning of the Great Turnip period. Turnips boiled, turnips roasted, turnips surprise spoiler. It's just more turnip. They're not nutritious enough to sustain you for long, but at least they're not dirt, yet. Soon the communal pot becomes thinner, both metaphorically and literally. You start stretching your meals with foraged greens, the kind usually fed to pigs. Nettles, sorrel and dock leaves make regular appearances. They're bitter, but if you close your eyes and pretend you're a noble dining in Paris, it almost tastes like misery with flair. Historians still argue whether peasants actually believed these wild weeds held medicinal properties, or if they just really needed to convince themselves dinner wasn't a total tragedy. Either way, welcome to the medieval salad bar. Bring your own vinegar. You won't have any. The church offers alms sometimes, usually a hunk of bread and a vague blessing, but that bread is dry enough to chip a tooth, and you're not sure if may your stomach be filled with grace counts as calories. Still, you adapt. You share meals with extended family, cousins, uncles, and that one person nobody actually remembers inviting. Eating becomes an event less about pleasure and more about strategy. Who gets the end of the loaf? Who pretends they're just not hungry so the child can have more? These decisions are made with solemn nods and the occasional muttered prayer. And then there's the hunger humour. The only thing sharper than your knives, which honestly aren't that sharp. Someone suggests boiling their shoe. Everyone laughs, then stops. Someone else eyes the beeswax candles a little too long. They're mostly tallow, they mutter, technically edible. You move the candles to a higher shelf. Food preservation becomes a communal obsession. You trade with neighbouring villages for a single scoop of rye or a suspiciously squishy onion. You dry anything remotely edible. Apples, herbs, possibly an old boot. Smoking meat is out of the question, of course. You haven't seen meat since St. Bartholomew's Day, and even then, It was a suspiciously skinny squirrel. Still you persist, even as your clothes hang loose, and the children sleep more often, too tired to play, too weak to cry. Even as the village dogs grow lean and wary, and the chickens stop laying, even as the turnips run out and you look longingly at the bark of the tree near the well. But you're still here, still gathering nettles, still stirring the pot, still hoping that tomorrow the sun will return, the soil will soften, and maybe, just maybe, a merchant will wander through with dried beans and a forgiving price. And while you scrape the last bit of stew from the pot with a sliver of bark, you swear tastes a little like rosemary. You remember that surviving isn't always about thriving. Sometimes it's about making jokes in the face of starvation and treating a boiled turnip like it's a banquet roast. And speaking of bark, you're about to find out just how many kinds of inedible things can become food when desperation knocks and the pantry laughs in your face. So here you are, staring at a bowl of what could generously be called soup, and less generously described as a warm puddle with ambitions. You've already gnawed through the turnips, said your emotional goodbyes to the last of the dried beans, and now you enter the next frontier of famine cuisine: bark bread. Yes, you peel the inner bark of trees dry, grind it and mix it with whatever flour-adjacent powder you have left. This might include ground acorns so bitter they'll make your mouth pucker like a judge at a vinegar-tasting crushed nutshells, or in truly inspired moments, sawdust. It's like baking, but with emotional damage. You bake this mixture over a low fire, if you're lucky enough to still have wood. If not, there's always dried animal dung. Adds a smoky note. The final product is heavy greyish, and has the same charm as a damp roof tile, but it fills the stomach, sort of. Historians still argue whether bark bread actually provided any nutritional value, or was mostly psychological comfort. Either way, it kept your jaws busy, which meant fewer arguments over who got to lick the inside of the cooking pot. Still hungry? Great. You've now graduated to famine foraging level 2. That's right, it's time to explore the vibrant, crunchy world of boiled roots, moss, and occasionally edible lichens. If you've ever wondered what desperation tastes like, it's the slimy aftertaste of a moss and thistle stew. On bad days, you pretend it's seaweed. On worse days, you pretend it's not there at all. And of course, there's the infamous famine cakes, known in some parts as sorrow patties. These were made by mixing clay-rich soil with chopped straw or chaff, and then shaping them into discs that were sun-dried or baked. The logic was, if you can't feed the body, you might as well try to fill the stomach. Side effects included intense gastrointestinal protest and a deep sense of culinary betrayal. Sometimes there's meat, not the delicious kind. We're talking about rats, birds, frogs, and the occasional hedgehog. Some peasants considered snails a blessing. Others couldn't tell if they were eating a snail or just something that happened to be wet and chewy. On rare occasions, desperation drove communities to consume leather, boiled boots, belts, or the soles of old shoes. And while that sounds medieval and dramatic, people genuinely did this. At that point, fashion was no longer about style, it was calories. But not all famine meals were tragic. Okay, they were mostly tragic, but there was creativity. Some regions developed odd but functional recipes, like porridge made with a base of ground peas and stale ale, or broth steeped with burnt straw for that smoky gourmet flavour. One record even mentions roasted earthworms, which, if you close your eyes and squint, sort of resemble medieval spaghetti, And there were jokes, always. One classic goes, "This soup is so thin the spoon died of loneliness." It doesn't land as well when you're on your 6th consecutive week of boiled dock leaves, but you laugh anyway, because what's the alternative? Crying into your bark loaf. A particularly strange and surprisingly documented practice involved boiling bones, yes, even long after the meat was gone. Villagers would collect discarded bones sometimes from trash heaps or abandoned battlefields and boil them repeatedly to create a gelatinous broth. It took days, smelled like sadness, and yielded something close to nutritional broth if you used enough imagination. Families guarded their famine recipes like treasure. You might not have land food or a future, but by St. Isidore, You had your aunt's dirt cake technique passed down with pride. By now, hunger has become part of the rhythm of your life. You know how to chew slowly, savouring every hint of salt or fat like it's a royal delicacy. You've developed famine etiquette. Don't ask for seconds. Don't comment on mystery ingredients. And definitely don't lick someone else's bowl when they're not looking. That gets you exiled. Or worse, put in charge of the next batch of moss muffins. Still, every now and then, someone makes a clever trade, and something magical appears, a real loaf of bread. It's small, precious, and devoured in silence. You don't waste crumbs, you don't even waste the smell. Just breathing it in is an event. And then just when you think you've seen the lowest depths of culinary compromise, someone shows up with a bright idea. What if we ask the saints to bless our bread into multiplication, which, as you'll soon see, leads you into the sacred, strange, and often slightly suspicious world of medieval food miracles. You're standing in a candlelit chapel, stomach growling like a feral dog, watching Sister Beatrix bless a crust of bread so hard it could double as roofing tile. You'd laugh, except this is deadly serious. In times of famine, food becomes spiritual. Bread becomes a symbol. Hunger becomes a test of faith. And let's just say you're barely passing. People around you murmur prayers, eyes flicking between heaven and that one hopeful hunk of holy carbohydrate. It's not that anyone really thinks it will multiply like loaves in scripture, but also maybe the saints work in mysterious ways, and nobody wants to be the cynic who gets smited before supper. In many villages, relics of saints were paraded through fields during famines as if inviting divine intervention with a sort of sacred guilt trip. Saint Isidore was particularly popular among peasants, patron of farmers and miracles alike. His relics were brought out in rainless seasons, waved over parched soil, and occasionally, yes, placed near food stores in hopes of spontaneous grain regeneration. Historians still argue whether these rituals actually boosted morale or merely distracted hungry people long enough for a turnip to ripen. But morale matters. When your belly's empty and the winter's long, even a sniff of hope can taste like a feast. Then there were miracle stories. One famous tale tells of a widow whose flour jar never emptied, no matter how many loaves she baked. Another speaks of a monk who fed an entire monastery with one blessed onion. These were passed down like recipes, half faith, half fable, all hunger. But miracles weren't just for passive consumption. Sometimes you got creative with piety. You might bake holy loaves marked with crosses, or fast not by choice, but with theatrical flair. I am abstaining in devotion, not because I'm out of food, you say, as your ribs quietly disagree. Pilgrimages spiked during famine years, not just out of desperation for divine favour, but also because pilgrims were traditionally fed along the way. It wasn't just a religious journey, it was a strategic food crawl. You'd hit every shrine chapel and kindly monastery between your village and wherever Saint Benedict allegedly sneezed once. If you were lucky, you got a crust. If not, you still got steps in and a better view of someone else's barley. And then there were the feast days. Oh, feast days. Irony incarnate. These were celebrations meant to mark saints' triumphs or holy anniversaries, usually involving elaborate meals. During famine, the rituals stayed, the food didn't. You'd stand in procession singing hymns about abundance while chewing a boiled weed. They called it fasting, you called it Tuesday. Even confessions got weird. Priests began hearing new sins like, I coveted my neighbour's carrot, or I stole dried peas from the church cellar. Some even declared stealing food for survival wasn't a sin, depending on the bishop, and possibly how nice the cheese was. But not everyone had access to holy intervention. Remote villages developed their own rituals, charms, chants, and semi-pagan offerings. One group buried coins under starving fields to remind the earth we were once generous. Another tied bundles of garlic to fence posts, reasoning that if it worked for vampires, it might scare off famine too. And of course, there was always a scapegoat. Someone must be blamed for the hunger. That old woman who talks to her goats, probably a witch. The oddly well-fed miller, obviously hoarding. The local lord with imported honey cakes. Well, he's untouchable but deeply unpopular. Food rumours spread like wildfire. Someone in the next village found wild barley, A priest in Alfeld can bless your soup into stew. Most were nonsense, but a few were true enough to keep hope alive. You cling to those whispers while lighting your candle, offering prayers to St. Lawrence and whoever else is listening. In the flickering glow, someone offers you a piece of dried beet. It's small, tart, almost sweet. You eat it like it's royal candy. And while others mutter prayers for spring rains, your mind drifts to something more immediate. Your village, your people. And how, despite everything, you've all managed to share what little you have, even if it means breaking a crust of miracle bread 6 ways and calling it dinner. Next to you, someone coughs, a dry, tired sound. You hand them the last sip of turnip water. They smile weakly. And just like that, even in famine, the sacred becomes practical, and the practical just a little more sacred. Of course, no amount of prayer can change the fact that your neighbour Greor is now stealing onions. Which brings us naturally to the ever so slightly chaotic world of medieval village justice and famine-induced food crimes. You catch him red-handed, though to be fair, it's mostly beet juice. Greor, the twitchy one with suspiciously well-fed goats, is crouched in your garden, stuffing something bulbous and vaguely edible into his sack. Your onions. Your precious frostbitten, slightly shriveled onions. You don't shout. That would be too generous. Instead, you stomp over, arms crossed, delivering a glare so potent it could curdle milk. Greor freezes. Somewhere in the background, a dog barks, as if even the animals know this is about to get awkward. Welcome to the famine version of village justice, where every vegetable is sacred and every theft is personal. The thing is, Gregor's not a villain. He's just as hungry as you. His kids are skin and bone. His wife looks like she hasn't smiled since last spring. And let's be honest, you once eyed his cabbage patch with impure thoughts. The medieval peasant village in famine time is a delicate social dance. Equal parts cooperation and passive-aggressive turnip hoarding. Neighbours help each other until they don't. One week you're sharing barley stew, the next you're accusing someone of hiding apples behind a loose floorboard. Historians still argue whether villages became more generous or more vicious during famines. Evidence suggests both. Some communities created commons, shared granaries managed by elders or monks, where food was portioned with relative fairness. Others became like reality shows, with less hygiene alliances, betrayals, unexpected banishments. Take the village of Nördlingen, for example. In the 14th century, a recorded dispute involved a man being put in stocks for stealing a loaf and a half of community rye. The punishment, public humiliation, 2 days on water alone, and the confiscation of his hat, which back then was like stealing someone's soul and umbrella at once. And yet support did exist. Churches opened their doors, sometimes literally. Monasteries set up soup lines, more broth than substance, but still a line. Elderly widows took in orphaned children. Villagers pulled their last carrots to feed the blacksmith's apprentice, because someone had to fix the pots when they cracked from too much stone soup boiling. But there were lines you didn't cross. One of them was hoarding. If someone was caught hiding food in a floor cavity or under the bed, classic mistake, rats love a blanket buffet. The village reacted. Fast. Public accusations flew like bad poetry. Committees of tired mothers and grumpy elders convened. If guilt was confirmed, the hoarder might be fined, shamed, or in rare cases told to go live with the sheep. The sheep weren't thrilled. There were informal laws too. You didn't steal from families with babies. You didn't lie about how many loaves you had left. And you never ever tried to sell mouldy oats as blessed grains unless you wanted a very angry priest and a mob of hangry peasants at your door. Children adapted quickly. They became stealthy scouts and foragers, sneaking out early to check if the baker's chimney was smoking or if the forest edge had any promising mushroom tufts. They also became tiny town criers, spreading whispers like old Marta just got barley from her cousin in the next town, or someone dropped a sausage outside the tannery. Dogs got sneakier too. Medieval mutts were survivalists. They learned which doors meant crumbs, which fire pits sometimes held bones, and which villagers were too frail to chase them off. One dog in a 15th century account was known for leading a group of children to the bakery every dawn, sitting patiently until someone threw it crusts. Folk hero behaviour. And then there was the barter systems. You've never seen such creative economics. A single dried apple slice could buy you a needle. A half cup of goat milk might land you a patch for your leaky roof. And if you had access to salt, you were basically nobility. Salt became a kind of famine currency, one pinch traded for 3 boiled cabbage leaves and a firm handshake. Of course, not everyone played fair. Travelling merchants sometimes sold miracle flour that turned out to be crushed chalk and stale oats. Others peddled potions allegedly made from blessed basil, designed to banish belly rumblings. They mostly caused diarrhea and buyer's remorse. Still, your village held together? Barely. There were arguments, yes, occasional chicken thefts, and the infamous carrot heist of last month. But there were also shared fires, late-night story sessions, and the kind of communal laughter that comes only when everyone's exhausted and someone accidentally farts while reciting a psalm. And Greor. You let him keep the onion. You make a show of being annoyed, but secretly you slip a second one into his wife's coat later that evening. He leaves a single egg at your doorstep the next day. No note, just the egg. It's enough. Because in famine, justice isn't about punishment. It's about remembering that even in your hungriest moments, you're still human, still trying, still making deals with turnips and offering forgiveness in root vegetables. But just as you start to believe in the fragile goodness of village life, the scream cuts through the dawn like a rooster with something to prove. You bolt upright from your straw mat heart, pounding hay stuck in your hair. No, it's not an animal, it's Marta, and Marta is in labour. In normal times, a birth would be cause for celebration. A midwife would be fetched, herbs would be boiled, neighbours would gather to gossip and gift small trinkets, a carved rattle, a coin for luck, a dried sprig of lavender. But these aren't normal times. These are famine times. And the only thing Marta has to give her baby is a name and a draughty corner by the hearth. You arrive just as the village midwife, Elsbeth, age indeterminate, an attitude formidable, barks instructions at a cluster of nervous relatives. Boil water, no hotter, not lukewarm like your last barley tea, idiot. Someone hands her a cloth so thin it might have once been a handkerchief before becoming philosophy. The room is cold. The fire has gone out again. The family's woodpile vanished weeks ago, and the only thing burning now is Marta's sheer willpower. She's pale, soaked in sweat, gripping a rag between her teeth. You don't know if she's more terrified of the pain or the life she's about to bring into a world where dinner might be thistle soup. Still, life insists. The baby arrives with a cry, a small startling sound, fragile and fierce. Elsbeth holds it up, squints. A girl, she says. Strong lungs, poor timing. Then she wraps the child in the least dirty cloth available and hands her to Marta, who smiles weakly and immediately starts counting fingers and toes like she's checking for miracles. And maybe she is, because in famine every healthy birth is a minor miracle. Historians still argue whether famine increased infant mortality rates in predictable ways. The records are patchy, the numbers sobering. Some scholars believe midwives adapted quickly, focusing on warmth, hydration, and herbal treatments, even without proper nutrition. Others argue that most babies born during severe famine didn't survive past a few weeks. In your village, though, survival is stubborn. Mothers save extra sips of soup for their children. Fathers skip meals entirely. Grandmothers invent wild lullabies about barley fairies and warm bread just to distract babies from the rumbling in their bellies. Baby food, ha! You mash whatever's softest boiled root-watery milk if the cow hasn't dried up. Sometimes it's a crust chewed first by a parent, then passed like a holy offering. Germs exist, yes, but so does hunger, and it wins every time. Diapers moss, warmth swaddling, by proximity, mother's siblings, the occasional sleepy goat. Safety. Mostly hope and someone standing guard near the fire, so the baby doesn't roll too close or too far. Children born in famine grow up faster. They learn which plants to avoid, how to sniff for spoiled grain, and what it means when the village bell rings not for prayer, but for a food cart spotted on the horizon. They also learn silence. Crying wastes energy, and even toddlers know better than to wail too long when there's no food coming. There are strange lullabies too. Songs not of dreams and moonlight, but of surviving frost and chasing rats away from the grain sacks. Their oddly cheerful set to simple tunes you hum out of habit even when your throat's too dry to sing. And yet, babies laugh, even in hunger. You remember holding your cousin's son, barely a week old, watching his tiny fingers grip your thumb with impossible strength. He hiccuped, then burped with the authority of a blacksmith, and everyone in the room laughed until someone cried. It's those moments that keep you sane. That and the occasional stolen nap near the fire, the warmth shared with siblings, like a smuggled treasure. But the truth is, some babies don't make it. Some mothers fade away quietly, having given everything they had, including their last spoonful of turnip broth, to the child now bundled in a neighbour's shawl. The village mourns silently. There's no energy for weeping. Just another tiny grave marked with a stone, a flower, and someone whispering, "Next time, please be born in spring." Still you keep going. You feed the children first. You teach them how to stretch a crust, to nibble the edges slowly, to make soup from bone and story. You play games with pebbles and twigs. You turn bedtime into legend time tales of days when apples grew fat and honey flowed in every kitchen. Tales of saints who fed whole villages with a whisper. Tales that might be nonsense or memory, or a little of both. And through it all life pulses. Children run, stumble, laugh. A mother hums while boiling water. An old man carves toys from discarded wood. It's not a feast, but it's survival with spirit. The market bell rings again, louder this time, like it knows it's the star of today's drama. You rush outside, heart thudding, half expecting a miracle. A travelling merchant with sacks of barley, maybe even salted fish. What you see instead is a cart. One single slightly lopsided cart pulled by a donkey, with a limp and the expression of someone who deeply regrets all life choices. Behind the cart is a merchant in a cloak that used to be red before ambition and mildew set in. He raises one hand dramatically, as if presenting a royal feast. "Behold," he cries, "wares for trade." You lean forward, everyone does, and then disappointment settles like fog. The wares are 3 cracked jugs of oil, a bundle of onions that have definitely seen better months, a few wrinkled apples, and something in a jar that looks like pickled despair. Still, it's something. People begin to gather, clutching whatever they can, trade wool scraps, broken tools, even a hand-carved spoon. It's the famine version of a Black Friday rush, only with more bartering and fewer elbows to the face. Everyone's desperate but polite-ish. Probably because you all saw what happened last week, when 2 old women fought over a questionable parsnip. One still walks with a limp. You step up with your offering, a small pot, not valuable, not beautiful, but functional. The merchant eyes it, then the wrinkled apple. You lock eyes. The tension could be sliced with a stale crust. Deal. You walk away triumphant. The apple is soft, but not mouldy. You split it with your sister, who bites in, like it's sacred fruit from the Garden of Eden. It might as well be. Markets during famine are strange little theatres. Historians still argue whether they brought relief or just exposed inequality. Some villages thrived with semi-regular trade, others became breeding grounds for tension, resentment, and very shady pricing strategies. Prices tripled, then quadrupled. One recorded account mentions a man who traded his last pair of shoes for a bowl of lentil gruel and never regretted it. You understand now. It's not about fair trade, it's about getting something. Anything that makes you feel like you're still part of a functioning world. Sometimes markets feature travelling entertainers, yes, even during famine. Jugglers, storytellers, maybe a musician, with 3 working strings. They know you have no coin, but they perform anyway, hoping for breadcrumbs or just a place near your fire. You clap, you laugh weakly, you forget for 5 minutes that dinner tonight is probably turnip water and regret. Some merchants sell items with wild claims. This powder cures hunger. It's flour. These beans grow overnight. They don't. Guaranteed plague-free apples, dubious. But your favourite pitch is from a toothless old man hawking mystery stew starter. When asked what's in it, he grins and says, "Hope." Children love the market, not for the food but for the drama. They chase chickens, stare longingly at fruit, and memorise the faces of everyone who walks away with something they didn't have. Gossip starts here, and it spreads fast. Did you see old Marta? She got a whole sack of oats. No way, she traded her cloak. She traded her husband's cloak. He's been sneezing since. You grin despite yourself. Because famine is cruel but community, that's what keeps it bearable. You share gossip like it's honey, sweet, rare, and maybe not good for you in large doses. Bartering isn't always so public. Some trades happen in whispers, behind cottages or out by the woods. A hunk of smoked fish for a night with someone's goat for warmth, probably. A chicken in exchange for silence. One man trades firewood for a lullaby. You don't ask questions. Then just when things are feeling almost festive, the merchant announces he's leaving. Storm's coming, he calls. Snow by morning. Groans ripple through the crowd. He packs his cart. People linger hoping for leftovers or a miracle. None arrive. As the cart creaks away, the bell falls silent. The crowd thins. You tuck your half-apple core into a cloth planning. To boil it later, apple water soup is something. The wind picks up. You shiver. Markets bring food. They also bring reminders that there's a world beyond your village, that some people have full carts while others have hollow stomachs. That trade is a dance of hope and disappointment, rhythm and risk. And as you tuck back into your cottage apple soup dream in hand, you can't help but think. Someone somewhere must be making decisions about this mess. Someone with power, someone with grain. Right, which brings you to the stone halls of nobility, where famine looks very different indeed. Meanwhile, far above your muddy cottage and your half-eaten apple core, a nobleman lifts the silver lid of his dinner platter and frowns. Only 3 pheasants, he says, with the confusion of someone who's never missed a meal. And the goose pâté is slightly overdone. You, by contrast, just boiled a boot heel for flavour. Famine at the peasant level is survival. Famine in the halls of nobility. It's a mild inconvenience, often solved by a stern letter to the cook and a supplemental snack of candied almonds. The disconnect is astronomical, but historically accurate. The ruling class lived in a parallel, culinary universe where food shortages mostly meant imports got delayed, and their wine came from Gascony. Instead of Burgundy. In theory, the nobility was supposed to help. Feudal contracts promised protection, sometimes even food. Lords were expected to maintain emergency stores, release grain at fair prices, and show Christian charity. In practice, well, let's just say, some were more charitable than others. Historians still argue whether noble aid during famines was motivated by genuine duty or riot prevention. Records show that some lords opened their granaries. Others simply raised taxes to pay for a new hunting lodge and hoped their peasants didn't storm the manor with pitchforks and passive-aggressive turnip notes. In cities, things were a bit better, at least structurally. Councils implemented rationing, banned hoarding, and in a few rare cases organised communal ovens and soup kitchens. Of course, the soup usually involved boiled cabbage lentils and disappointment, but still effort was made. In the countryside, it depended on who your lord was. If he was generous, you might receive a loaf of coarse bread per household. If he was indifferent, he might offer spiritual encouragement and remind you to pray harder. One even distributed pamphlets titled Patience and Other Virtues during scarcity. He was later chased out of his estate by very patient people with torches. You sometimes wonder how nobles spend their famine days. Imagining them playing chess with cheese pieces, you grumble while soaking roots in water. Perhaps they dream of rustic meals like plain stewed lentils. You dream of actual lentils. But power doesn't just stay in manors and castles. The church has influence too. Bishops often sat on grain councils, controlled vast stores of tithes, and decided whether to bless a harvest or blame you for sinning enough to ruin it. There's an infamous tale about one bishop who ordered a week of fasting in solidarity with the starving. When asked what he would eat during this time, he replied, "Only boiled duck and wine." The peasants were not amused. Still, some religious leaders were genuinely moved to act. They opened their storehouses, gave sermons, urging the rich to share, and even walked barefoot into villages to distribute alms. These moments stood out not because they were expected, but because they were rare. Meanwhile, famine created opportunity. Unscrupulous merchants and corrupt officials hoarded grain and waited for prices to skyrocket. They bought low, sold high, and occasionally needed bodyguards when mobs found out. One well-documented case involved a mayor secretly hiding sacks of flour under a false chapel floor. When discovered, he claimed they were for a spiritual fast. The townspeople fasted him right out of office. Some lords tried to maintain order through force. They doubled the guard, enforced strict curfews, and punished theft harshly. One village in southern France had a bread gallows not for hanging people, but for hanging fake loaves as a warning. Symbolism 10-10, morale 0. Despite all this, you know the truth. Help from above is rare, uneven, and often comes with strings. So peasants learn to rely on each other. The real leaders are the widows who know which roots are edible, the blacksmith who quietly trades his last iron nail for oats, the priest who looks the other way when someone slips extra grain into their cloak. Still, when the Lord's carriage rattles past your village, you stare, just for a moment, wondering what it's like to live with walls that keep the cold out, to eat until you're full, to not dream about bread. But your stomach growls again, reminding you that dreams don't cook dinner, and neither does nobility. Then something shifts. The air smells strange, the sky glows with a shade of yellow you don't trust, the birds vanish. Because famine, it turns out, doesn't just come from greed or mismanagement. Sometimes it comes straight from the sky. You wake up to silence, not the peaceful kind like fresh snow or a good nap. This silence hums. It's the kind that presses on your chest, that makes the hairs on your arms stand at attention. The kind of silence that whispers, something is very, very wrong. The air smells dusty, metallic, like a forge and a thunderstorm had an argument. You step outside and look up, and that's when you see the sky. Not blue, not grey, yellow, a weird sickly mustard yellow, like someone left the sun out too long and now it's gone off. This is not just weather, this is omen weather. By the end of the week, your cabbages are melting into mush. The barley shrivels before it's ripe. Even the turnips, those stubborn optimistic little tubers, rot in the ground like they've just given up. You've officially entered famine courtesy of the sky. Historians still argue about the precise causes of the Great Famine of 1315, 1317, but the signs were all there. Freak weather, relentless rain, and a cold so cruel it stunted crops for years. Add a possible volcanic eruption somewhere halfway across the globe, and you've got a recipe for widespread European culinary despair. In your village, it starts with rain, not the helpful kind that patters politely. This rain lashes sideways like it's mad at the dirt. Roofs leak, fields flood, carts sink into the mud. You stop measuring time in days and start counting dry sock hours. Then come the clouds that never leave, blocking out the sun, like someone put a wet wool blanket over the world. Crops can't grow, grass won't sprout. The cows look at you with betrayal in their eyes and refuse to moo. And when things finally dry up, drought. Of course, because why not? It's as if the weather itself decided to cosplay as a vengeful trickster god. You try everything. Chanting in the fields, burning old shoes in sacrifice. Greor tries dancing naked in the barley patch. Don't ask. Nothing works. The grain that does grow is sad. Thin stalks, blackened heads. You thresh a whole field and get just enough flour to make one very depressing biscuit. You eat it anyway. Rivers recede. Wells dry up. Livestock start dropping from heat stroke. Water becomes precious, too precious for washing. You've forgotten what your own face looks like beneath the dirt crust. It's fine. So has everyone else. People start watching the sky like it's a temperamental landlord. Is today the day the clouds give us mercy? Is that breeze a good sign, or a prelude to another crop-destroying tantrum? You find yourself blaming the moon, or the stars, or that one guy who won't stop whistling. Someone's got to be responsible. Religious fervour spikes again. Priests perform rain prayers, then anti-rain prayers, then just generalise shouting at the heavens. They hold processions, swinging incense and hope. Meanwhile, you're wringing out your tunic for soup water. One particularly inventive friar insists the weather is punishment for gluttony. Gluttony Hugh, who hasn't seen meat in 3 months. The village throws turnip peels at him until he reconsiders. Some nights you sleep outside because your cottage is too damp. You lie on a hill, watch the stars, and try not to cry over your one remaining onion. You almost name it. And just when you think the sky can't surprise you anymore, it sends fog. Thick, choking fog that rolls in like a woolly sea. You lose 2 chickens and 1 uncle in it. The chickens return, the uncle doesn't. Strangely, some days feel almost normal. A bit of sun breaks through. The air warms. A beat grows. You start to hope. That's when the locusts show up. Yes, locusts. They come in humming clouds, chewing through what little green remains, like it's a buffet. Children scream. Adults scream. Even the goats scream, which you didn't know was possible. At this point, laughter is your only weapon. You joke about opening a restaurant called Just Rainwater, the house special. A single leaf and disappointment. But beneath the sarcasm, you start to understand something terrifying. You're not just fighting hunger anymore. You're fighting the planet, the sun, the rain, the dirt. They're all unreliable narrators now. And so you do what peasants have always done. You endure. You dry what you can. Forage anything vaguely plant adjacent. Invent new recipes like bark and betat surprise. Teach children how to catch rain in buckets. And sleep in shifts so the fire doesn't go out and hope doesn't freeze. Because the earth has turned its back. But the village leans in. And soon this unnatural weather starts creating equally unnatural behaviours. Like spontaneous dancing that no one can stop. It begins with a twitch, nothing dramatic, just your neighbour's cousin's foot tapping to no music at all. Then her arms start moving, her hips follow. You think she's just cold or has finally cracked from too much moss tea. But within minutes, others join in. And soon, half the village is dancing, not gracefully. This is not a festival. It's frantic, wild, joyless. Bodies flailing, eyes, glazed feet, pounding the earth with a desperation that feels more curse than celebration. You watch in horror, clinging to a fence post as a man spins himself into a ditch and keeps spinning. A child pirouettes until she collapses. Someone's grandmother does the worm. Welcome to one of the strangest famine side effects in recorded history, the dancing plague. Historians still argue what caused it: mass hysteria. Ergot, poisoning from mouldy rye, spiritual possession. One theory suggests that the extreme stress of famine, fear, and fatigue pushed people into a collective mental break with physical consequences. Another theory. People just needed to move. After months of lying down hungry, maybe your legs remember joy before your brain does. Whatever the cause, it's terrifying and contagious. At first you try to help. You offer water cushions, holy water. Nothing works. The dancers can't stop. Some go for hours. Others dance themselves into unconsciousness. A few don't wake up. Monks are summoned. They chant, sprinkle ashwave relics around like sweaty metronomes. No effect. A travelling bishop suggests building a stage to let the demons finish their performance. So now there's a literal platform in the square, and dancers are collapsing off the edges like spiritual stage divers. Even you aren't immune. One afternoon while collecting firewood, your knee starts bobbing. You slap it hard. Not today, Satan, the knee behaves, for now. And yet not all the dancing is grim. Some villagers embrace it. They start calling themselves the Blessed Feet. They chant, stomp, invent moves with names like the Wobbly Monk and Pious Crab. You find yourself tapping along during chores. Is it madness, survival? A strange kind of joy. A friar suggests organised dancing to channel the energy. Soon there are weekly controlled convulsions, complete with musicians banging pots and a referee with a stick. You laugh more than you have in weeks, because as ridiculous as it seems, this chaotic choreography is giving people something they desperately need release. For just a few moments, the hunger fades. The weather, the rot, the rotund bishop. Yelling about sin, it all disappears. There's just rhythm, and sweat, and movement. One woman dances until she breaks her shoe, then throws the shoe into the air, and keeps going barefoot. Someone else begins composing ballads about it. You contribute a line. He twirled like a plague with the grace of a goat. Not your best work, but it earns a smile. Still the phenomenon spreads. Nearby towns report similar outbreaks. Some believe it's a divine test, Others blame witches. Greor insists it's from eating mouldy cheese. No one's sure if he means that seriously, but it sounds scientific enough. In response, church leaders crack down on music. No fiddles, no drumming, definitely no whistling. You immediately begin whistling just out of spite. Meanwhile, local governments try to contain the outbreaks. One city hires professional dancers to outdance the afflicted. Another bans red shoes, believing they tempt spirits. A third covers the roads with ash so the dancers trip. They do. But then they roll and keep going. And yet just as suddenly as it started, it fades. The dancers stop, collapse, rise again with sore legs and sheepish grins. What happened, someone asks. No one knows. All you know is that for a few strange days your starving village turned into a music festival, run by exhaustion and existential dread, and somehow it helped. Because in famine, survival isn't just about eating, it's about finding ways to feel human again. To laugh, to move, to stomp your feet and say, I'm still here. Still, just as your blisters begin to heal. A new threat arrives at your door, and this one has fur, teeth, and very, very hungry eyes. The howling starts at twilight, low at first, a distant, uncertain wail like the wind's practicing its vocals. But then comes the second howl, closer, more confident, and by the third the message is clear. The wolves are back. You freeze mid-stir of your bark stew ladle, trembling slightly. Across the village, heads lift, eyes narrow, and every dog goes unnaturally quiet. That's never a good sign. You live near the edge of the forest, and usually that means mushrooms and mildly cursed berries. But now, with famine emptying both kitchen and den, the line between wildlife and wild threat is gone. The wolves are starving too, and they've heard the same rumours. There's still firelight in your village, still life, still something, anything to eat. Historians still argue just how frequent these wolf attacks were during medieval famines. But there's enough evidence, scribbled margins, monk accounts, and local tales that survived generations to confirm they happened. Packs driven by desperation would come right into towns, and they weren't looking for pets. You've heard the old stories, the one about the boy who went to relieve himself behind the woodshed and never came back. All the time wolves circled the village well for days, picking off chickens, goats, and one very unlucky cat. They say the cat tried to fight back. Legend. Tonight, your door is bolted, reinforced with firewood. You clutch your ladle like a weapon. Sure, it's mostly ceremonial, but it has a good swing. The wolves don't come in a pack at first. A single one appears near the baker's shed, thin, patchy, more skeleton than fur. It sniffs the ground, looks around, and slinks away into the fog. You don't relax, neither does the baker. By the next night, there are 5, and then the screaming starts. Not human, goat. Greor's goat, in fact. You hate to admit it, but she put up a good fight. You all hold a quick candlelight vigil and vow to name the next baby after her. Possibly even if it's a boy. The village forms a watch. You take turns staying up, poking the fire, listening for growls. Everyone's tired, but no one wants to be surprised by fur in the dark. Children sleep with boots on, just in case running becomes necessary. One brave soul tries to make peace. Old man Tibbins, who's lost most of his teeth and possibly all of his marbles, leaves a bowl of stew out as an offering. The wolves take the bowl and a chunk of his roof. Peace talks end. You consider defensive measures. Flaming torches. They laugh at them. Loud banging pots. Mildly annoying. A barrier made of turnips. Strangely effective, but only because the wolves are as tired of turnips as you are. Then comes the boldest night yet. The wolves breach the livestock shed. They're met by Farmer Anselm and a pitchfork that's seen better decades. There's a brief scuffle, some yelping a chicken, launched into the air, and a victory. Kind of. Anselm keeps one boot, the wolves keep the other. Still the village gets smarter, fires burn brighter, meat scraps are burned rather than buried. Patrols are doubled, and you, brilliant exhausted, you design a wolf alarm, using a string of bells, a pulley, and your cousin's screaming geese. It works. Too well. Now no one sleeps, but at least you're informed. Children start playing wolf patrol during the day. They stalk around with sticks, growling and tackling each other into haystacks. You don't stop them. It keeps morale up and maybe trains the next generation of goat defenders. Amidst the tension, there's camaraderie. You share stories by the fire, like the time the butcher's apprentice tried to domesticate a fox, or when Sister Beatrix swore she heard a wolf confessing sins outside the chapel. You suspect it was just Greor, muttering in his sleep. But it's funnier this way. And yet there's a shift. The wolves begin to retreat. Maybe the hunting's better elsewhere. Maybe the nights have grown too bright. Or maybe, just maybe, they've realised what you already know. This village isn't giving up. Not to hunger, not to weather, and definitely not to scruffy drooling carnivores. When the last howl fades into the trees, you all wait in silence, listening, hoping. Nothing. Just the soft crackle of firewood, the gentle coo of a pigeon who's either extremely brave or extremely clueless, and the sound of someone snoring in the hayloft. You take a deep breath. The air smells like ash and onions. It's oddly comforting. Still, you can't shake the feeling that winter isn't quite done with you yet. But now at least you've got fire. You've got stories. And tomorrow you've got a new stew plan, which brings us gently to a very strange final course. Laughter, resilience, and an onion named Gerald. Gerald is not strictly speaking alive. He is an onion, wilted, soft in places, definitely past his prime. But in your village, Gerald is a legend. He started as a joke. You found him buried beneath a pile of straw during a particularly dismal pantry inspection. Slightly squishy but still vaguely onion-shaped, you held him aloft like a trophy. "Behold our winter saviour," someone shouted. Laughter erupted. It had been days since anyone laughed. So Gerald stayed, not in a stew pot where he technically belonged, but on the mantel wrapped in a cloth given a name, and treated with the reverence of a very strange saint. Children bowed to him. Adults asked him for good crop dreams. Someone made him a tiny hat. It shouldn't have worked, but it did, because famine, for all its horror, had taken nearly everything, but not your ability to laugh. To find warmth in the absurd, to name an onion and talk to it like an old friend. Historians rarely write about Geralds. They focus on data yield, loss mortality rates, migration trends. They forget that humans are, if nothing else, hilariously stubborn. And sometimes survival means choosing joy over logic, humour over despair. In the evenings, you gather by the hearth, telling stories not of kings or saints, but of that time the baker tried to ferment turnips and almost started a second plague. Or when Elsbeth accidentally blessed the wrong baby and had to perform a de-blessing ceremony with vinegar and sheep's wool. Or when someone swore they saw a pig wearing a cloak, still unconfirmed. There's a kind of warmth that fire can't give, the kind that comes from shared glances, whispered jokes, and collectively pretending that your supper stew has layers of flavour when in reality it's moss again. Children too adapt. One declares herself mayor of Famine Town and issues decrees like no crying before noon and extra nap rations for anyone who catches a rat. Her enforcement is questionable, but the village obeys. You invent games like what would you trade for a plum or guess that smell. The answers are often alarming. There's music, not from instruments, you sold those long ago, but from mouths, from rhythm, from someone beating a pot lid like a war drum while two teenagers whistle off key. It sounds terrible. It sounds perfect. Laughter becomes currency. A good joke can earn you half a crust, a really good one. 2 sips of ale, if anyone has any. Your own contributions include, why did the turnip break up with the beet? Because it was too routine. I asked the wind for dinner. It gave me hay. And the crowd favourite, we wanted a feast. We got feet. Guess whose? You're no bard, but you're keeping spirits up. That matters more. One night, Marta, the new mother, strong as ever, starts composing lullabies. Not for sweetness, but for honesty. Sleep now, my turnip. The wolves are asleep. The fire is fading. The stew's getting deep. It doesn't scan perfectly, but it brings tears to tired eyes. And slowly the edge of hunger begins to dull. A merchant brings dried lentils. A neighbouring village trades rye. The weather softens. A thaw begins not just in soil but in spirit. There's a strange kind of hope growing, even if it smells faintly like fermented goat. Still you keep Gerald on the mantel, a reminder that sometimes survival looks like stubbornness with seasoning. And yes, eventually someone drops him. There's a collective gasp. The hat is recovered. A funeral is held. Greor gives a speech. Elsbeth cries. The onion is buried near the community fire pit with full honours and a small carved plaque that reads, "He didn't flake when we did." You plant a seed there. Not symbolic, a real seed. Something might grow. Because famine is never just about food. It's about what you feed when there's nothing left. Courage, kindness, absurdity. And as the winds quiet and spring begins to flirt with the fields again, you realize you've made it. Not unscarred, not full, but together, and still smiling. Still, before we close the shutters and lay down for the night, there's one last thing to do. Let's let everything slow, gently, into stillness. The fire crackles low, no longer a frantic blaze, but a gentle rhythm of ember and ash. You sit back on your straw mat, fingers laced behind your head, the weight of the day folding into the warmth of shared silence. Outside, the wind whispers instead of howls. The wolves have moved on. The sky, that unpredictable drama queen, is finally calm. You exhale slowly. No need to check the pot tonight. It's already been shared. The last ladle scraped the last crust, divided the last joke, something about turnips again, still echoing faintly in the corners of the room. Around you, people settle in like puzzle pieces, limbs tangled beneath threadbare blankets, heads resting. On rolled tunics, a baby tucked beneath someone's cloak. It's not comfort in the grand sense. There are no pillows, no mattresses, no downy quilts, but it's comfort all the same. A warmth that's woven not from fabric but from presence. Someone hums, soft, tuneless. It might be Marta, it might be you. The song has no beginning and no end, just the rise and fall of breath, the rhythm of surviving. And slowly your thoughts begin to wander less sharply now. No more desperate calculations about how many beans are left or whether the clouds mean rain or rot. Just simple memories. The way the fire looked in your sister's eyes. The silly way Greor tripped over the goat and claimed it was a tactical maneuver. The way Gerald the Onion became a saint because everyone needed something to believe in, even if it had layers. Historians may never write about this. Not the laughter, not the dancing, not the 1,000 quiet acts of grace. Someone sharing their last crust, someone tucking a child's feet in, closer to the fire, someone pretending they're full so you can eat just a little more. But you'll remember, because famine wasn't just a chapter, it was a season of your life. And you survived it not just with bark bread and moss broth, but with courage and humour, and the unshakable, ridiculous belief that things would get better. And now they are. Outside, the frost melts. Somewhere in the field, a seed stirs. Inside, hearts settle. You let your eyes close. No wolves, no howling wind, no aching hunger gnawing at your ribs. Just the slow rhythm of shared breathing, and a quiet promise that tomorrow will taste a little sweeter, because you've made it to spring. And spring, dear listener, always comes. The fire grows softer now, curling into a gentle breath of warmth against the stone. Shadows lengthen, stretch, and slowly dissolve into the quiet corners of your little cottage. Outside, the wind has forgotten how to knock, and the stars blink sleepily above fields that no longer feel hostile, just still. You lie down at last, the straw beneath you rustling like the turning of a page. Every muscle begins to melt, not from fatigue this time, but from peace. Your hands, so often clenched in effort, finally loosen. Your chest rises and falls in slow, even tides. The hunger has quieted, the cold has eased. Even your memories, sharp as they once were, start to blur around the edges, like softened parchment. Tonight there are no wolves, no ash-dark skies, no dancing feet, pounding the dust in desperate rhythm. Just the steady hum of life continuing, of breath shared and burdens lightened, of one long season drawing to a close. And tomorrow the seed you planted might show its first green curl. The barley might rise again. The markets might hum not with tension, but with trade. And laughter, real full laughter, will come not just in resistance, but in abundance. But for now it's enough to rest, to feel warmth where once there was only want, to be still in a world that's finally still with you. So sleep, little peasant, brave survivor, quiet soul. The famine has passed, and dawn is just a few dreams away.